stepped in and disproved some of these claims. This is simply not adding up. There's a lot of questions being asked. Now, in addition to the allegation that Russia is interfering for the purpose of getting Trump reelected, there have also been reports now that Russia is interfering for the purpose of supporting U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, who continues to be leading in the Democratic primaries. And at this point, Russia has come forward, a spokesperson, and said that this is simply paranoia. And this is not an accurate assessment of what is taking place. Take a listen.
These are just the usual paranoid claims, which unfortunately we will be hearing more of as the U.S. elections approach. Of course, they have nothing to do with the truth.
Now, viewers will recall that the 2016 presidential elections in the United States were filled with allegations of Russian meddling and Russian collusion, much of which have been debunked since then. However, it appears that as the 2020 presidential race gets going, these allegations will be resurfacing in new forms.
Caleb Orpin there from New York with the latest. Thanks, Caleb, for that update. This Monday marked the start of a historic extradition hearing in London, which will decide whether the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, is handed over to the United States. The whistleblower, who is currently in Belmarsh prison, is wanted in the United States on espionage and hacking charges. He could face a jail sentence of up to 175 years. Nadira Tudor has more.
It is the first day of the hearing in Britain that will decide eventually whether or not Julian Assange will be extradited to the US as requested. Now, his father has been talking out. He's talked about Julian being tortured and says what will happen to journalists, it'll be the same as what's happening to Julian if this extradition is successful.
The torture of Julian, as witnessed by Nils Melzer, the United Nations rapporteur on torture, all of those reports are available. That is what will happen to journalists, publishers and publications if this extradition, this political extradition of Julian Assange is successful.
Do you know, when I arrived this morning, it was absolute chaos. Apparently, this court has never experienced the number of people that they've had to deal with today. The journalists had to queue for about an hour to 2 hours, and you heard chanting for the whole time of the proceedings. Hours and hours of chanting from supporters outside, which you could hear inside the courtroom. Now, it was really interesting what was said. We had QC James Lewis and QC Edmund Fitzgerald. QC James Lewis giving the US point of view via British law and making lots of comparisons with British law and what would happen if those charges against Julian Assange had happened in the UK. In terms of the British point of view, speaking on behalf of the US, they talked a lot about the Official Secrets Act, the 1911 and 1989 Official Secrets Act, which is generally only used on spies. It bans the disclosure of classified information, passed to target foreign spies and traitors, and it's also used against journalists. There have been reports that the government plans to revamp this legislation. This has caused huge controversy amongst journalists, and the National Union of Journalists, they've raised an alarm saying that this would make it easier to prosecute journalists reporting on national security issues and sources who work for them. Now, the US lawyers have said several times, and particularly today, that Assange is putting people's lives at risk. We can hear from the WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Christian Hrafnsson, and he's been speaking to the media during the breaks of this process.
What we heard this morning was more of the same thing we've been hearing for 10 years. We first heard it in July 2010. We're putting lives at risk. And now, 10 years later, there is no evidence of such harm. And on the contrary, Pentagon official was forced to admit in the Manning trial in 2013 that nobody had been physically harmed because of these revelations in 2010 and 2011. And now, in 2020, they are in court, not able to present a single evidence of that harm. Still they go on.
So the first day over, and you can see that this is a really highly controversial case. Some argue one of the most important cases against press freedom. Assange is seen as being a champion in the cause of transparency and freedom, and we will, of course, be following this over the course of the week.
It's certainly been a long and taxing legal saga for Julian Assange. Saskia Taylor looks now at how the WikiLeaks founder has found himself closer than ever to extradition.
Hero or enemy number one, you decide. Either way, Julian Assange has become a name and a face recognised all over the world.
I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, I only want to do it, illegally shoot the son of a...
Free Julian Assange!
Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism. He should be treated as an enemy combatant.
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service.
By defending Julian Assange, we defend our most sacred right.
The 48-year-old Australian put a target on his back when he leaked a trove of classified US documents, laying bare abuses of power at the very highest levels. With the US Justice Department hot on his heels, Assange sought asylum in London's Ecuadorian embassy for 7 long years, before suddenly and unceremoniously being dragged out by British police. A stab in the back, and perhaps coincidence that Ecuador's bank account had just been credited with a $4.2 billion loan from the IMF, where the US has huge sway. So, from the 4 walls of the embassy to the 4 walls of a jail cell, Assange was taken to London's Belmarsh prison and handed an exceptional sentence.
In Britain, bail violations seldom lead to prison sentences. They are generally subject only to fines. Assange, by contrast, was sentenced in summary proceedings to 50 weeks in a maximum security prison, clearly a disproportionate penalty that had only a single purpose: holding Assange long enough for the US to prepare their espionage case against him.
He and his lawyer had just 15 minutes to prepare for the trial, which itself also just lasted 15 minutes. Betrayed by Ecuador, feeling let down by the legal system, Assange now claimed his fundamental human rights were under attack. He was put in solitary confinement for up to 23 hours a day. The UN and rights groups were in disbelief, and some feared for more than just his freedom.
We have real concerns on the evidence currently available that Mr. Assange could die in prison. The medical situation is thereby urgent. There is no time to lose.
Against this backdrop, is it surprising there's suspicion swirling around the extradition trial, especially given the US-UK treaty clearly states no citizen can be extradited for political purposes, which many claim this is. And while Washington says this case is strictly about national security, it seems Queen Elizabeth II didn't get the memo.
I must tell you, however, that as a constitutional sovereign, Her Majesty acts on the advice of her ministers and remains strictly non-political at all times. This is, therefore, not a matter in which the Queen would intervene.
If the UK kowtows to its allies' request, Assange might be dealt not just a life sentence without parole, but even the death penalty if Washington decides to add on further charges in the future. That's if it finds a willing jury, which apparently won't be a problem.
Assange will receive a trial by jury in Alexandria, Virginia, the notorious espionage court, where the US tries all national security cases. The choice of location is not by coincidence. The cases are always tried in front of the same judge, behind closed doors, and on the strength of classified evidence. Nobody has ever been acquitted there in a case like that. That is a pre-arranged affair, a show trial to make an example of Julian Assange. The point is to intimidate other journalists.
Global outcry, human rights, the law, the right to a fair trial. Turns out they're all weak adversaries in the face of a government who will fight tooth and nail to keep a lid on its dirty secrets.
Meanwhile, the family of Harry Dunn, a British 19-year-old who was killed in a road accident last August, are calling for Assange's extradition to be blocked. They say the US first needs to hand over Anne Sekulas, the woman suspected of taking their son's life. She's the wife of an American diplomat and has admitted she was driving on the wrong side of the road. She left the UK shortly after the tragic incident, claiming diplomatic immunity. And despite requests from the British government, Washington says it won't agree to her extradition. A lawyer for the Dunn family has accused the US of rank hypocrisy.
Whilst America is protecting or harboring the person who's accused of killing Harry Dunn, they have no business calling for the extradition of anybody from the United Kingdom. It is. Well, I can't even find the words. It's just disgusting conduct. The cases are completely different, but the overarching principle of reciprocity governs all extradition cases. If the United States is going to rip up the extradition treaty between the U.S. and the U.K. as it's done here, then the United Kingdom needs to stand up to that, and both countries need to abide by the extradition treaty. So, we are very clear, working, doing our best to work with the UK government to make sure that the decision that the United States has made to not extradite Anne Sekulas is not accepted. But we are in the middle of a diplomatic standoff. This is one of the darkest moments in the US-UK relationship.
An Estonian woman said she's had to flee to Russia to protect her daughters. She's claiming asylum after her husband was acquitted of sexually abusing their children. She shared her story with RT.
My older daughter started scratching her face. I would ask her, "Why are you scratching yourself? You shouldn't hurt yourself." And she would reply, "Mom, I feel guilty about what Dad did to us." Then we went to a psychologist. After several sessions, she told me, "The girls are telling the truth about what they went through. It's a classic reaction."
Anna Finnsrøsen has taken her 2 daughters to Russia to keep them away from their Norwegian father. She accuses him of molesting the girls, something he strongly denies. According to her, it started back in 2012 in Norway when the girls were aged 1 and 2.
When our younger daughter was born, he offered to bathe our older daughter. I needed something from the bathroom, so I walked in without knocking. I opened the door. They were not washing. They were not even in the bath. They were just standing there naked.
Anna went on to describe the horrific details of that incident. Anna, who is from Estonia, obtained Estonian passports for the girls and took them to her homeland. But the husband hired a lawyer, filed for custody, and won the right to see the children for a week every 2 months. Anna was legally unable to prevent him from taking the children to Norway.
After the first trips, the children would come back and tell me, "We bathed naked with Dad," or "We slept naked with Dad in the same bed." Sometimes the older one would wake up screaming. For a long time, I couldn't admit to myself what was happening. And in May 2016, he once again brought the children back from a week-long stay there. I saw a very strange scene when we were saying goodbye. I asked my daughter whether they played like that when they are in Norway, and my youngest one said yes.
After that, Anna went to the Estonian police and a criminal case was opened. She says a gynecologist examined the girls and found evidence suggestive of abuse. The father was then arrested and charged. Anna visited a psychologist who gave some advice on how to get the truth from her older daughter.
The psychologist said I needed to talk to her in the home environment, and when she started talking, it was a nightmare. She told me that her dad tickled there, that it was painful. But later at the trial, they accused me of teaching my children what to tell the investigators and social workers.
Despite the girl's testimony, the Estonian court said there was insufficient evidence to convict Jostein Finnsrøsen, so he was acquitted. He then sued his wife and in 2018 managed to win custody of the children. Mr. Finnsrøsen denies all the allegations against him.
My father was accused of doing something to a 13, 14-year-old. She started using it as leverage that, my father was like that, then I have to be like that.
Anna launched a legal appeal and turned to human rights groups for help, but she was unable to overturn the ruling. In January this year, Jostein Finnsrøsen was due to take the girls to Norway. So Anna decided to flee to Russia, taking the girls with her. They are now being looked after while Anna's asylum claim is being processed.
Police in the central German town of Volksmaßen say around 30 people, including children, have been injured after a car plowed into a carnival procession. The driver's been detained and the authorities are investigating the incident. Peter Oliver has the details.
Well, the chief of police in Frankfurt has confirmed that 30 people were injured, 7 of those seriously, including children, after a car ploughed into carnival goers attending the Rosenmontag celebrations in Volksmaßen in central Germany. The Frankfurt Attorney General's office have taken over the investigation. They're describing it as looking deliberate at the moment, but as far as they're concerned, it doesn't appear to be either a political or extremist act. A 29-year-old man, understood to be from the Volksmaßen area, was arrested at the scene. All carnival events in the region have been cancelled because of this. Eyewitnesses describe the car having accelerated into the crowd and travelled some 30 metres. That's why so many people, it would seem, have been injured. Police had to protect the suspect as he was being taken into custody from angry members of that crowd who were trying to get to him to find out exactly what was behind this incident that, as I say, according to the chief of police of Frankfurt, has left 30 people injured, 7 of those seriously, after a car crashed into carnival goers in the central German city of Volksmaßen.
Well, the German Chancellor's Christian Democrats have suffered a devastating blow in state elections in Hamburg, with support for the party plunging to a meagre 11.2%. The CDU finished in a distant third place behind the Social Democrats and the Greens, leaving its leaders in disarray.
I will get straight to the point and not beat around the bush. It is a bitter day for the German CDU. It's a historically bad election result for the CDU in Hamburg.
With popular support for the CDU slipping, German media have mockingly dubbed the party the chaotic, demoralized union, arguing that it suffered its deepest crisis in 2 decades. Well, the union's woes have been compounded further by this month's announcement that its leader, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, will resign once a replacement is found. Once seen as Angela Merkel's hand-picked successor for the chancellorship, the moves raised doubts about the political course being charted by both party and country. We asked political commentator Stephen Meissner just how dire the situation is for Germany's Christian Democrats.
It's looking pitch black for the CDU. Merkel basically seems to have missed out on her exit time, and the whole game is starting to fall apart right before her very eyes. She's in the process of destroying the CDU here. I would place this whole disaster basically firmly on her shoulders. She's not left enough time for her successor to really move in and fill her boots and take over and place themselves in gain some experience and place themselves in a position to be able to fight and win an election in 2021. So she's just not left enough room for people, and she's missed her exit point, basically. She's really missed it.
The number of coronavirus patients located far from the deadly epicenter in China has suddenly spiked. Italy put emergency measures in place over the weekend, with 150 reported cases and 4 deaths. It's Europe's first major outbreak, while Iran has the highest number of deaths outside China. Officials there have raised the number to 12 earlier this Monday. Authorities in Italy cancelled the carnival in Venice. Major sporting events were also postponed, as entire towns and communities were put on lockdown. In Asia, cases of infected patients surged in South Korea on Monday, with another 161 people confirmed ill. That takes the toll there to almost 800. The government's also temporarily shut down religious movements and a cult whose members make up a sizable number of the known infections. Meanwhile, the US is accusing Russia of spreading alarm and coronavirus-linked conspiracy theories.
By spreading disinformation about coronavirus, Russian malign actors are once again choosing to threaten public safety by distracting from the global health response.
The US State Department alleges that thousands of fake social media accounts are pushing what it calls Russian talking points. Some of the posts apparently claim, for instance, that the virus is an American biological weapon and is being used to inflict political and economic damage on China. The misinformation is said to be undermining the global response to the epidemic. RT's Donald Corter reports.
Foreign meddling, support for Donald Trump, sowing discord, the saga continues. You'd think by now the U.S. State Department would have burned through its reasons to blame Russia for everything under the sun, but with the coronavirus epidemic in full swing, it looks like they're just getting started.
Russia's intent is to sow discord and undermine U.S. institutions and alliances from within. including through covert and coercive malign influence campaigns.
Moscow says Washington is just stirring up trouble, and that could be the case, but we're not even allowed to investigate the accusations. Officials are clinging to the details of the classified report kept secret by the State Department's Global Engagement Center. It apparently accuses Russia of using fake social media accounts to spread conspiracy theories about America's involvement in spreading the coronavirus. But if we compare the secret report's charges against Russia to what Moscow is actually doing, we see two very different pictures. If it's conspiracy theories American officials are looking for, they might find them closer to home. They're the ones publicly casting doubt on official information coming out of China. While some of them were later retracted, allegations that the virus came from a Chinese bioweapons lab were quick to emerge stateside.
Just a few miles away from that food market is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. They have lied consistently about this virus from the beginning.
A senior administration official told me that the United States does not have, quote, high confidence in the information coming out of China at this point.
The World Health Organization has called for all sides to think twice before making accusations, and the Chinese envoy to the U.S. has warned of the damage inaccurate information can cause.
The 2019 nCoV outbreak and response has been accompanied by a massive infodemic, an overabundance of information, some accurate and some not, that makes it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance when they need it.
It's very harmful, it's very dangerous to stir up suspicion, rumors, and spread them among the people. For one thing, this will create panic. It will fan up racial discrimination, xenophobia.
There might be a lot of confusion and mudslinging, but at least U.S. officials are trying to look on the bright side of this worldwide epidemic.
The fact is, it does give businesses yet another thing to consider when they go through their review of their supply chain. So I think it will help to accelerate the return of jobs to North America.
This is a wake-up call for an issue that has been latent for many years, but is critical to U.S. economic and national security. We cannot necessarily depend on other countries, even close allies, to supply us with needed items, from face masks to vaccines.
And while Washington continues to accuse Russia of undermining the country's institutions, they seem to be doing a good job of that already.
Russia serves a very important purpose in American politics these days. Rather than analyzing its own problems and trying to figure out how they arose and how to fix them, Americans find it much easier to blame someone else, and that target is usually Russia. The U.S. The U.S. intelligence agencies feel that they can only benefit if they attack Russia and accuse Russia of various malign activities. But I don't believe Russia has any desire, any interest in spreading disinformation about the coronavirus, because if you spread disinformation, that allows the disease to spread all the more rapidly, and Russia is vulnerable as well. So why would Russia want to burn down its own house?
Israeli Defense Forces say Palestinian militants in the occupied Gaza Strip have fired multiple rockets into southern Israel. This comes after the defense minister said Tel Aviv had plans to radically resolve the long-standing crisis.
We're preparing a plan to fundamentally change the situation in the Gaza Strip. I really understand the situation of the people in the south. They deserve peace and security.
Well, it certainly seems as if escalation is on the cards. We have heard from the Israel Defense Forces Home Front Command that all roads, all schools and the train line along the Israel-Gaza border are closed until further notice. Now, this follows a deadly night of retaliatory airstrikes conducted by the Israeli army on several locations in northern Gaza and on the Syrian capital, Damascus. Now, the Israeli army says that these included sites belonging to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, and amongst them were weapons facilities and training sites. It also says that 4 people were injured. However, we're hearing from Islamic Jihad that 2 people have been killed, and it has vowed to avenge those deaths.
The Zionist aggression against Damascus and the murder of 2 of our members as a result of the bombing is something that must be stopped and will not go unnoticed.
Well, this escalation comes after the American President Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century, which was supposed to see a long-lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but has been slammed as the slap of the century by the Palestinians. All of this coming just a week before Israel holds its 3rd parliamentary election in a year. The country is in a political deadlock. Now, at the same time, the Americans have recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights and also put in place plans for Israeli annexation of the West Bank. All of this is being seen here by many as attempts by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to win political points.
Up next, our documentary looks into the history of sectarian violence in Ireland. And if you're watching us in the UK, it's Renegade Inc. delving deeper into privatisation within the British healthcare system in the great NHS heist.
Russiagate hoax lives on. The sequel has just been released, starring, of course, Donald Trump, but also now Bernie Sanders. Indeed, Russiagate has achieved cult-like status. Also, Turkey on the ropes in Syria.
In Dublin, the campaign group Justice for the Forgotten had for years been demanding a public inquiry into the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. It still took 7 years for the Irish government, 6 years after the IRA's 1994 ceasefire, to agree to a restricted form of inquiry. Under Justice Henry Barron, the inquiry found, in his own careful words, and despite London refusing to cooperate with the inquiry, that the case for collusion was neither fanciful nor absurd. Crucially, however, for the families bereaved by other Glenanne murders north of the border, Barron published a full appendix listing the ballistic links between other key attacks.
After publication of the Barron report, it became obvious to us that there was still no response from the state, that very serious allegations of criminality were not going to be investigated, that there was going to be no response. And so we decided that we should respond, we should bring people in, international figures. So we approached a number of people, UN investigators who'd worked in El Salvador, people who'd worked on the South